Right now, somewhere on this planet, an alarm clock is screaming at a sleeping body, forcing it awake before the sun even rises. For nearly the entire history of our species, no human being ever woke up this way. There were no alarms, no phones buzzing, and no artificial light pulling anyone out of a dream. So how did ancient humans actually begin their day, tens of thousands of years before clocks ever existed? The answer is slower, stranger, and far more connected to the body than almost anything in modern life today. Scientists studying the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth have discovered morning patterns that quietly contradict what most people assume. There was no rushing, no panic, and no sudden jolt of stress the moment their eyes first opened each day. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how ancient humans woke, moved, and prepared for the world each morning. You will also learn why modern researchers believe our bodies are still wired for that ancient rhythm, even right now. This question matters today because sleep researchers have started studying remote hunter-gatherer tribes to understand human sleep before electricity existed. Groups like the Hadza in Tanzania and the San in the Kalahari Desert still wake up much like our ancestors once did. Anthropologists who lived alongside these communities recorded something modern city dwellers rarely experience anymore: a completely natural waking process. Later in this video, I will explain why ancient humans almost never needed anything resembling a modern alarm to wake up. I will also explain what the very first physical act of the day usually was, long before any food was eaten. You will discover how the position of the sun quietly controlled nearly every decision made in the earliest hours of daylight. And you will learn why children in ancient tribal societies were often taught their most important lessons before breakfast even happened. Understanding this ancient morning rhythm might genuinely change the way you think about your own rushed and exhausting morning routine. Anthropologists estimate that hunter-gatherer life represented the dominant human lifestyle for well over 90% of our species' entire history. This long span means the ancient morning routines described here were not a brief phase, but the normal human experience for millennia. The most common myth about ancient humans is that they were jolted awake by fear, danger, or sudden noise every morning. In reality, anthropological studies suggest most hunter-gatherer waking was slow, gradual, and driven by light rather than panic. Human bodies contain an internal clock known as the circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle that controls sleep and wakefulness. This internal clock is extremely sensitive to natural light, especially the soft blue light that appears just before sunrise. Without walls, curtains, or solid roofs blocking the open sky, early humans experienced this pre-dawn light directly against their closed eyelids. Researchers studying the Hadza found that most adults woke up gradually within the hour surrounding sunrise, without any external trigger at all. Their bodies produced a natural drop in melatonin, the hormone responsible for sleepiness, timed almost perfectly with the coming daylight. At the same time, a hormone called cortisol began rising gently, giving the body a slow and steady sense of alertness. This is completely different from a modern alarm clock, which forces cortisol to spike suddenly and often creates unnecessary stress. There is something even stranger almost nobody talks about. Ancient humans rarely woke up feeling groggy the way modern people often do. Sleep scientists believe this grogginess, known as sleep inertia, is worsened by artificial light and irregular modern sleep schedules. Without electric light disrupting their internal clock, ancient humans likely experienced far more consistent and complete sleep cycles each night. Birdsong itself may have played a quiet role in this natural waking process, long before any human ever built a clock. Researchers studying dawn choruses, the burst of bird calls that happens just before sunrise, note that this sound predictably rises with first light. Living constantly surrounded by nature, ancient humans likely absorbed birdsong as an unconscious signal that the night was ending. Historians studying pre-industrial sleep patterns have uncovered something surprising called segmented sleep, a pattern almost unknown in modern life today. Historian Roger Ekirch analyzed centuries of old documents and found repeated references to a first sleep and a distinct second sleep each night. Between these two sleep periods, many people naturally woke for roughly one quiet hour in the deep, silent middle of the night. During this quiet waking hour, people reportedly prayed, reflected, talked softly, or simply lay awake before drifting back into sleep again. Some researchers believe ancient humans experienced a similar segmented pattern, gently waking sometime after midnight before returning to rest until dawn. This means the earliest hint of morning wakefulness may have actually begun hours before actual sunrise, not exactly at first light. Modern sleep labs, studying volunteers deprived of artificial light, have observed the same two-phase sleep pattern reappear within just weeks. This suggests continuous, uninterrupted 8-hour sleep may itself be a relatively recent, artificial habit rather than a natural human default. A widely cited study, led by researcher Jerome Siegel, examined sleep among the Hadza, San, and Simane peoples in remarkable detail. This research found that these groups typically slept between roughly 6.5 and 7 hours nightly, similar to many modern adults. However, the timing of this sleep was tightly linked to temperature drops and rising light, rather than any fixed clock-based schedule. Researchers observed that waking consistently occurred as ambient temperature began rising after its lowest point, reached in the hour before dawn. This temperature-based waking mechanism suggests the human body may respond to environmental cooling and warming as much as it responds to light itself. Once ancient humans opened their eyes, the very first action almost never involved searching for food immediately. Archaeological evidence from ancient hearths suggests the first task of the morning was usually tending carefully to the fire. Fires from the night before were rarely allowed to fully die out, since starting a brand new one required enormous effort. Excavations at Cavemen Cave in Israel revealed evidence of repeated hearth use stretching back roughly 300,000 years. This suggests that fire maintenance, including careful morning tending, was already a deeply established human habit long before recorded history began. A single person, often an elder or a designated firekeeper, would carefully uncover the glowing embers left from the previous night. Dry grass, bark, or small twigs were added slowly, with gentle breath used to coax the hidden embers back into flame. This quiet act of fire tending often happened in near silence, well before most of the group had even stirred awake. Anthropologists studying modern tribal communities describe this early morning moment as calm and almost meditative, rather than rushed or chaotic. The warmth of the freshly rebuilt fire became a natural signal to the rest of the group that the day had begun. Imagine a small group lying near the dying coals of last night's fire as the sky slowly shifts from black toward gray. One figure quietly sits up, moves toward the ashes, and begins gently blowing air across the barely visible embers. Around them, other members of the group stir slightly, their bodies responding to warmth and dim light rather than any spoken command. No one shouts orders, and no one rushes toward tasks because urgency simply was not the natural mood of early morning life. This slow, communal waking process appears repeatedly in anthropological records from foraging societies located across completely different continents. In many ancient camps, domesticated dogs, some of humanity's earliest animal companions, were often already awake before any human stirred. These dogs frequently reacted first to distant sounds, unfamiliar scents, or approaching movement long before human senses could detect any danger. A dog's soft growl or sudden alertness sometimes served as the very first informal warning system of the entire ancient morning. Archaeologists studying ancient dog burials suggest this close partnership between humans and dogs stretches back at least 15,000 years. This ancient alliance meant that, in a very real sense, some ancient mornings technically began with an animal rather than a human. Once the fire was steady, attention usually turned toward water, one of the most immediate needs of the human body. In many hunter-gatherer societies, fetching water was often one of the very first physical tasks completed each day. This task frequently fell to specific members of the group, depending entirely on the customs of that particular culture or region. Walking to a water source in the cool morning air also served a practical purpose beyond simple hydration alone. Early morning temperatures made physical movement far more comfortable than the intense heat that often followed later by midday. Researchers studying the San people of the Kalahari Desert noted that demanding walking tasks were deliberately scheduled for the earliest hours. This pattern reveals something modern life has largely forgotten, that the body performs best when movement matches natural temperature cycles closely. But here's what most people don't realize. Breakfast as a distinct formal meal barely existed in many ancient hunter-gatherer societies. Instead of a formal first meal, many groups simply ate small amounts of leftover food from the previous day's efforts. Full meals were often reserved for later in the day, once successful foraging or hunting had actually taken place. This means many ancient humans functioned for hours each morning on relatively little food, unlike most modern breakfast habits today. Modern researchers studying intermittent fasting have found that mild morning hunger may actually sharpen focus and physical alertness in humans. This suggests ancient humans may have unintentionally used a mild natural fast to remain sharp during crucial early hunting hours. Elderly members of the group often held a distinct morning role, since their experience and steady presence provided quiet stability nearby. While younger adults left camp for water, hunting, or foraging, elders frequently stayed behind, caring for infants and very young children. This early morning arrangement allowed younger, more physically capable members to focus entirely on demanding tasks outside the immediate camp area. Infants and toddlers were often kept close to the fire, wrapped securely, while soft conversation and gentle care filled the quiet morning air. Anthropologists, studying multi-generational care in foraging societies, argue this shared responsibility allowed communities to function efficiently every single morning. Once basic needs like fire and water were addressed, the group would begin quietly organizing the practical work of the day. In many hunter-gatherer societies, mornings were the time when hunting parties gathered to prepare their tools and discuss strategy together. Spears, bows, or throwing sticks were checked carefully, since a damaged weapon could mean the difference between success and serious failure. Experienced hunters often used this quiet morning window to teach younger members subtle tracking skills passed down through many generations. Tracks left in the cool, damp morning soil were often far easier to read than tracks baked dry by afternoon heat. This meant morning light itself became a practical tool, revealing footprints, disturbed grass, and other subtle signs of nearby animals. Imagine a young hunter crouched beside an older tracker, both studying a faint impression pressed into the soft morning ground. The elder points to the depth of one edge, explaining quietly how it reveals the direction the animal was moving. The young hunter memorizes every detail, aware that this fleeting morning lesson could someday determine whether his family eats that week. Meanwhile, in many cultures, gathering plants, fruits, and roots was assigned to a separate group, often organized by gender or age. These gatherers used intimate seasonal knowledge, remembering exactly where specific plants grew and precisely when each one would ripen. This knowledge was rarely written down, since most ancient human societies relied almost entirely on spoken memory and oral tradition. Oral tradition simply means passing important knowledge from one generation to the next purely through spoken stories and direct instruction. Among the Juhonsi San, gathering plant foods traditionally fell largely to women, while hunting large game was primarily handled by men. Women's gathering, however, actually provided the overwhelming majority of daily caloric intake for the entire group across most recorded years. This means that despite the popular image of a dramatic morning hunt, quiet plant gathering was often the true backbone of daily survival. Morning gathering trips required deep botanical memory, since a single mistake identifying a plant could result in serious illness or worse. Young girls frequently accompanied their mothers on these early gathering trips, absorbing this critical knowledge through direct hands-on experience. There is something even stranger almost nobody talks about. Morning was often considered the very best time for teaching children this knowledge. Anthropologists studying tribal education have found that formal lessons for children frequently happened during the earliest hours of daylight. Elders believed that young minds were calmer and more focused before the noise and activity of a full day began. Children might be shown how to identify a poisonous plant, distinguish fresh animal tracks, or practice tying a secure knot. Unlike a modern classroom, these lessons happened while walking, gathering food, or sitting quietly around the newly rebuilt morning fire. Storytelling also played an enormous role, with elders using short teaching tales to explain dangers, values, or important survival lessons. These stories were rarely just entertainment, since nearly every tale carried a practical lesson about survival or community behavior. Modern educational psychologists have found that early morning hours are genuinely linked to sharper memory formation and better information retention. This suggests ancient tribal elders may have intuitively understood something about learning that modern science only recently managed to confirm. This kind of intimate, practical teaching filled countless ancient mornings long before anything resembling a written textbook ever existed. Beyond practical survival tasks, many ancient cultures also treated the morning as a deeply spiritual or symbolic moment of the day. In numerous cultures throughout history, the sunrise itself was viewed as a powerful symbol of renewal, rebirth, or a divine presence. Some communities incorporated brief rituals, such as facing the rising sun, speaking quiet words, or sharing a short moment of stillness. Shamans, spiritual leaders found in many traditional societies, sometimes used the early morning for personal reflection or private quiet ceremony. A shaman is a person believed to communicate with spiritual forces on behalf of their community, often through structured ritual practice. Imagine a lone shaman standing at the edge of camp, facing east, watching the very first sliver of sunlight break the horizon. Their eyes stay fixed on the light while their lips move silently, offering words meant only for that particular moment. Behind them, the rest of the camp continues its own quiet morning routine, undisturbed by this brief and deeply personal ritual. These quiet morning rituals were rarely elaborate performances, and were instead often simple, private, and deeply personal in nature. Researchers studying present-day indigenous communities have documented similar quiet gratitude practices tied closely to the very first light of day. This reflects something profound, an instinct to acknowledge a new day before immediately rushing into its many demands and tasks. But here is what most people don't realize: gratitude-based morning practices are now being studied by modern psychologists for genuine mental health benefits. Some contemporary research suggests that brief moments of gratitude shortly after waking can meaningfully improve mood throughout the entire day. This means an instinct present in ancient human cultures may now be quietly validated by modern psychological research decades later. Once foraging or hunting parties returned, or once leftover food was retrieved, someone usually took responsibility for basic morning food preparation. This often meant reheating remnants of the previous night's meal over the freshly rebuilt fire, rather than cooking anything entirely new. Roots, nuts, or dried meat might be warmed slightly, softened, or simply distributed as they were, requiring very little preparation time. Sharing this modest morning food was often a communal act, with portions distributed according to established customs within that particular group. This simple, low-effort approach to morning food meant significant cooking energy could be saved for the larger meal eaten later that day. Another overlooked aspect of ancient mornings involves how the human body was physically activated before any strenuous activity even began. Cool morning air, often combined with exposure to cold water during washing or bathing, provided a natural physical wake-up signal. Modern researchers studying cold exposure have found it can trigger increased alertness by activating the body's natural stress response system. Ancient humans likely experienced this same effect simply through ordinary daily contact with cool morning water, without understanding the underlying biology. Unlike modern humans who often remain seated indoors for hours after waking, ancient people were almost immediately physically active instead. Walking to gather water, tend animals, or begin foraging meant the body moved steadily within minutes of waking each day. This gentle but consistent morning movement likely helped regulate blood flow, joint mobility, and overall alertness far more naturally than sitting. There is something even stranger almost nobody talks about. This pattern closely resembles advice modern doctors now give for improving morning energy. Many physicians today recommend gentle movement and natural light exposure shortly after waking to reduce grogginess and improve daily focus. This means ancient humans may have unintentionally followed a daily routine remarkably similar to modern medical recommendations for genuine wellness. Basic hygiene also played a quiet role in many ancient mornings, though it looked nothing like a modern bathroom routine. Washing with cool stream water, rubbing ash on the skin, or applying natural oils were common practices across many different cultures. Some groups used specific plants known for their scent or mild cleansing properties as part of an established morning washing habit. Clothing or minimal coverings were checked and adjusted at this time, particularly if the day ahead involved travel or difficult terrain. These small, repeated acts of morning care reinforced a sense of order and readiness before the group's tasks properly began. The ancient morning was also defined by a distinct layered soundscape, completely unlike the artificial noise of a modern household. Insects quieted gradually as temperatures shifted, while birds grew louder, creating an audible, ever-changing signal of the advancing morning hour. Wind patterns, the crackle of the rebuilt fire, and murmured voices formed a soft background rhythm behind nearly every ancient morning task. This rich sensory environment meant ancient humans likely relied on hearing and smell just as much as sight to judge the passing morning. Smoke drifting from a distant camp, or the scent of damp earth after dew, likely carried subtle meaning entirely lost on modern ears. Morning was also frequently a moment of communal check-in, where the entire group briefly gathered before dispersing to separate tasks. This gathering allowed leaders or elders to share warnings about recent animal activity, shifting weather, or changes in the surrounding landscape. Anthropologists note that this brief morning exchange functioned somewhat like a modern team meeting, without any formality or written notes involved. Everyone left this short gathering with a clear sense of the day's priorities, spoken aloud rather than written down anywhere. Seasonal changes also shaped ancient morning routines significantly, since daylight length shifts dramatically between summer months and winter months. During long summer mornings, tasks like foraging or hunting often began earlier, taking full advantage of the extended daylight hours. During shorter winter mornings, Many groups moved more slowly, carefully conserving energy, while daylight remained limited and genuinely precious. In Arctic communities, such as traditional Inuit groups, seasonal light created even more extreme morning conditions than most other regions faced. During certain winter weeks, the sun barely rose above the horizon at all, forcing morning routines to rely on other cues. Inuit families often used the behavior of animals, changing snow texture, or accumulated experience to judge the approximate time of day. During summer months, by contrast, constant daylight meant morning had to be defined by activity and rest rather than darkness or light. This remarkable adaptability shows that ancient morning routines were never based on a single universal rule, but on careful environmental awareness. Reading the sky itself was another quiet ancient morning skill, long before any written weather forecast ever existed. Certain cloud patterns, wind shifts, or the exact color of the rising sun were carefully observed by experienced group members each day. Many cultures independently developed folk sayings linking a reddish morning sky to approaching storms or significant weather changes later that day. Modern meteorologists confirm that this particular folk observation actually has a real scientific basis rooted in atmospheric light scattering patterns. This means ancient morning sky watching was not simple superstition, but an early, informal form of genuine practical weather science. This flexible, nature-driven scheduling stands in sharp contrast to modern life, where clocks demand identical wake times regardless of season. Modern chronobiologists, scientists who study how time and light affect living organisms, argue this rigid scheduling may actually harm human health. Chronobiology research increasingly suggests humans function best when daily schedules shift naturally alongside changing seasonal daylight patterns. This means the rigid, clock-driven morning many people experience today may actually work against deeply ingrained human biology. Eventually, as the sun climbed higher and temperatures rose noticeably, the distinct rhythm of ancient morning naturally gave way to midday activity. There was no precise clock marking this transition, only a gradual shift in light, heat, and the mood of the entire camp. This blurred, natural boundary between morning and midday stands in sharp contrast to the rigid 9-to-5 structure many people follow today. Understanding this blurred transition helps explain why ancient humans rarely experienced the specific, abrupt stress of a fixed morning deadline. It is worth remembering that the rigid clock-driven morning most people know today is actually a very recent invention. Mechanical alarm clocks only became widely available to ordinary households during the late 1800s, alongside growing industrial factory work. Before factories demanded fixed shift times, most human communities throughout history simply woke according to natural light and biological need. In early industrial towns, workers called knocker-uppers were paid to tap on windows each morning, since affordable alarm clocks barely existed yet. This strange, now forgotten profession only existed because factory schedules had already begun overriding the natural human waking rhythm. Historians studying the Industrial Revolution argue that factory whistles, not sunlight, gradually became the dominant morning signal for millions of workers. This shift represents one of the most dramatic changes to human waking behavior across the entire history of our species. Modern researchers studying sleep disruption have linked chronic misalignment between internal body clocks and rigid schedules to several serious health problems. Conditions including obesity, elevated blood pressure, and mood disorders have all been associated with long-term disruption of natural circadian rhythms. This growing body of research suggests something remarkable, that ancient humans may have unknowingly protected themselves from problems many people face today. So what can modern people actually take away from understanding how ancient humans truly began each and every day? Ancient mornings were rarely rushed, and were instead driven by gradual light, gentle movement, and a calm internal biological rhythm. The first act of the day was often quiet fire tending, not an immediate scramble toward food or demanding work. Water gathering, foraging, and hunting preparation followed at a natural pace, shaped by cool temperatures and available morning light. Children frequently received some of their most important lessons during these calm early hours, long before formal schools ever existed. Gratitude, reflection, and simple spiritual practice often marked the earliest moments of daylight across many completely different ancient cultures. Cold water, natural movement, and sunlight exposure activated the body gradually, without the sudden jolt of a modern alarm clock. Modern science, from sleep research to chronobiology, increasingly confirms that many of these ancient patterns supported genuinely healthier human bodies. Perhaps the most important lesson is that mornings were never meant to feel like an emergency, but rather a gentle beginning. Somewhere between ancient fire pits and modern alarm clocks, humanity may have quietly lost a rhythm the body still remembers. This means something as ordinary as your own morning may still be quietly shaped by instincts inherited from deep prehistory. Even today, isolated communities practicing similar routines offer a rare living window into humanity's original daily rhythm. That rhythm, patient and unhurried, may still be worth remembering the next time an alarm clock interrupts a peaceful dream. If this glimpse into ancient daily life fascinated you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into forgotten human history. A quick like genuinely helps this channel continue researching and sharing these overlooked stories about how our ancestors actually lived. Share this video with anyone who feels exhausted by modern mornings and might appreciate a different, ancient perspective on waking. In an upcoming video, we will explore what ancient humans actually did as the sun began to set each evening.